The story begins in the outlaws' hideout, a dusty, dimly lit cabin in the middle of nowhere. The gang is celebrating their supposed triumph, capturing the wife of a wealthy rancher. The leader of the gang, a burly man with a scruffy beard and a cowboy hat tilted low, raised his glass high. "Too easy money," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the cramped cabin. The others cheered, their laughter filling the room, while their captive, a woman in her mid-30s, sat silently in the corner, hands tied. Her calm demeanor seemed out of place given the situation. "Why so quiet, ma'am?" one of the gang members sneered, leaning closer to her. "Scared of what's gonna happen when your husband doesn't pay up?" She raised her head slowly, her eyes sharp and calculating. "I wouldn't worry about my husband," she said, her voice steady. "But you might want to start worrying about yourselves." The room fell silent, the gang exchanging uneasy glances. The leader scoffed, trying to mask his discomfort. "Big words for a little lady in a heap of trouble." The woman leaned back against the wall, a faint smirk on her lips. "Trouble? Oh, sweetheart, you haven't seen trouble yet." As the outlaws exchange uneasy glances, the camera pans out of the dimly lit cabin into a sunlit prairie, transitioning into flashbacks that delve into the woman's mysterious past. The soft rustle of prairie grass filled the air as a younger version of the woman, dressed in plain work clothes, rode horseback under a golden sunset. Her name was Clara Thornton, and the quiet ranching life she lived now was far removed from the tumultuous years that had shaped her. Years earlier, Clara was known as the Silver Hawk, a moniker whispered in awe and fear across the frontier. She wasn't a fighter by nature, but necessity had forged her into something more. Clara had grown up in a small town plagued by bandits, a place where justice came too late, if it came at all. Her transformation began after her father, a local merchant, was swindled and left bankrupt by an unscrupulous gang. Determined to protect her family, Clara worked tirelessly, mastering skills that few women of her time dared to pursue. She became an expert horse rider, a keen tracker, and a master of reading people. While others saw her as an ordinary young woman, she cultivated a sharp mind and a steely resolve beneath her calm exterior. One day, a traveling lawman visited their town, seeking recruits for a newly formed peacekeeping initiative. Intrigued, Clara volunteered under the guise of helping with paperwork. Little did they know her sharp memory and knack for strategy quickly made her indispensable. In her years with the lawman's team, Clara gained a reputation for outsmarting outlaws, often using her wit to dismantle schemes before violence became necessary. Her most legendary feat involved negotiating the peaceful surrender of a notorious gang by uncovering hidden alliances and exploiting their internal rivalries. But her success came at a cost. The constant pressure of living on the edge, always calculating, always watching, left her yearning for a simpler life. When she met Jacob Thornton, a kind-hearted rancher with a dream of building a life far away from the chaos, Clara found her escape. She hung up her metaphorical badge, adopting the quiet role of a rancher's wife. However, her past never truly left her. The flashback shifts to Clara in the present, still tied up in the outlaw's cabin. Her calm gaze scans the room, cataloging every detail. The frayed edges of the curtains, the positions of the outlaws, the faint markings on the leader's belt. "You've been awfully quiet," the leader muttered, narrowing his eyes. Clara's lips twitched in a faint smile. "I was just remembering a time when I dealt with men like you. It never ended well for them." The gang exchanged wary glances, sensing something unnerving about her confidence. The outlaws begin to sense that Clara isn't as helpless as they assumed. Her calm demeanor and cryptic remarks create a palpable tension in the cabin. As time passes, subtle clues about her resourcefulness start to emerge, keeping the gang on edge. The cabin creaked under the weight of the gang's unease. The leader, Brock, paced near the door, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. The celebration had simmered into wary silence, with each outlaw glancing at Clara as if she were a coiled snake waiting to strike. Brock stopped pacing and turned to her. "All right, lady. Enough of the cryptic talk. Your husband's gonna pay us to get you back, so you'd better pray he cares enough to make it quick. Clara raised an eyebrow. Is that what you think this is? A simple ransom job? Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. One of the younger gang members, Sam, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Boss, maybe we should have done more homework on her, he muttered. Quiet, Brock snapped, glaring at him. She's just trying to get inside your head. Clara chuckled softly, her eyes gleaming. Inside your head? Honey, I'm already there. Let me guess. You're running low on food. You're using this rundown shack because it's out of sight, and you've been arguing about what to do next. Am I close? The gang exchanged nervous glances. Clara's smirk widened. I've spent enough time around men like you to know how this goes, she continued. You think you're in control, but deep down, you're terrified of making the wrong move. And judging by that dented buckle on your belt, Brock, you're not as confident as you want them to think. Brock instinctively reached for his belt, his jaw tightening. You're playing a dangerous game, lady. I'm not playing anything, Clara replied, her voice steady. I'm just observing. And what I see is a group of men out of their depth. Her words were unsettlingly calm, as if she were a teacher pointing out the flaws in a student's essay. Sam, now visibly anxious, whispered to the outlaw beside him, She's messing with us. This doesn't feel right. Brock slammed his fist onto the table, the sudden sound making everyone jump. Enough, he barked. She's tied up. She's got no allies out here. We're in control, got it? Clara tilted her head. If that's what helps you sleep at night, Brock. But I'd start keeping an eye on that road out there. The outlaws turned to the window instinctively, as if expecting to see something or someone approaching. The tension in the room thickened as their imaginations ran wild. Meanwhile, Clara shifted slightly, her movements deliberate yet subtle. She had been studying the room for hours, noting the weaknesses in their setup and the fraying nerves of the gang. She leaned back against the wall, exuding an air of quiet confidence. You should be asking yourselves why I'm so calm right now. Brock's glare faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. The room felt like it was holding its breath, the air heavy with unspoken fears. Clara's eyes darted to the window, drawing the gang's attention once again. Brock growled, frustrated by the way she seemed to control the room despite being tied up. Enough of the games, he barked, grabbing a chair and planting himself directly in front of her. What do you know that we don't, huh? Clara smiled faintly, as if amused by his desperation. It's not about what I know, Brock. It's about what I planned. Brock frowned, the other outlaws murmuring among themselves. Planned? You've been tied up here all day. Clara tilted her head toward the window. Have I, though? Suddenly a faint noise broke the tense silence, a rhythmic, metallic clanging coming from outside. It was distant at first, but it grew louder with every second. What the hell is that? Sam whispered, his eyes wide as he moved toward the window. The sound grew clearer, horseshoes striking the rocky path. But it wasn't just one horse. It was several. Brock shot to his feet, his voice booming. Stay where you are, it could just be travelers. Clara chuckled softly, her confidence unwavering. Oh, Brock, travelers don't ride like that. That's a formation, a precise one. The younger outlaws exchanged panicked glances. Boss, she's right, Sam stammered. That's not random. Through the grimy window, they could make out shadows moving against the horizon. As the riders drew closer, the faint glint of polished gear reflected the sunlight. Brock stormed to the door and flung it open, squinting into the distance. Who are they? He muttered, though his voice lacked the bravado it carried earlier. Clara leaned forward in her chair, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Those would be friends of mine. The gang turned to her in disbelief. Friends? Brock sneered, though his voice wavered. You're bluffing. Am I? Clara asked, arching an eyebrow. Did you really think I'd let myself be taken without leaving breadcrumbs for them to follow? The noise grew louder, the sound of disciplined riders approaching with purpose. Brock's confidence crumbled as he watched the figures come into focus. The lead rider pulled up just outside the cabin, a tall man with a weathered face and an air of authority. His gaze swept the area, landing on Clara inside. Ma'am, he called out, his voice firm but respectful. You all right in there? Clara's smirk widened. Took you long enough, Sheriff. I was starting to think I'd have to handle this myself. The sheriff dismounted, gesturing to his posse to surround the cabin. Let's make this easy, boys, he called to the outlaws. Come on out and we'll settle this peacefully. Inside, panic erupted. The gang members looked to Brock, their leader now frozen in indecision. Clara, still tied up, leaned back with a satisfied sigh. Your move, Brock, she said softly. Brock slammed the door shut, turning to face his gang. Panic was written across their faces as the sheriff's men waited outside, their silhouettes outlined against the evening sun. We can fight our way out, Brock growled, though his voice lacked conviction. Clara let out a quiet laugh, drawing every eye in the room. Fight your way out, she echoed. Against the sheriff's men? Against me? Oh, Brock, you're more delusional than I thought. Sam, the youngest of the group, stepped back, his hands trembling. Boss, she's been playing us from the start. Look at her. She hasn't even broken a sweat. This whole thing was a trap. Shut up. Brock snapped, but the uncertainty in his voice was impossible to miss. Clara shifted in her chair, her calm confidence unnerving them further. You know, she began, I gave you every chance to do the right thing. All you had to do was let me go. But now, you're in over your heads. She turned her attention to Sam, her voice softening. You're not like them, are you? You don't want to be here. Sam hesitated, glancing between her and the rest of the gang. His voice was barely a whisper. I didn't sign up for this. I thought we were pulling a simple job, not this. Clara nodded, her expression understanding. Then leave, she said simply. Walk out that door and turn yourself in. The sheriff's a reasonable man, and you've still got a chance to make things right. Sam looked at Brock, who glared back, his fists clenched. You leave, you're dead to me, Brock spat. Sam squared his shoulders, his fear giving way to determination. Maybe that's a good thing, he muttered, moving toward the door. The tension in the room reached its breaking point as Sam stepped outside, hands raised in surrender. The sheriff's men greeted him calmly, guiding him away from the cabin. Brock turned to Clara, his face twisted with anger. You think you've won? You're just a rancher's wife. You don't scare me. Clara met his gaze with a steady, unyielding stare. I don't need to scare you, Brock. You've already done the hard part yourself. The sound of boots on the porch made Brock flinch. The sheriff called through the door, his tone firm but patient. Brock, it doesn't have to end badly. Step out and we'll settle this without trouble. Brock's bravado cracked, his shoulders slumping as reality set in. One by one, the other outlaws followed Sam's lead, stepping outside to surrender. Clara remained seated, watching Brock wrestle with his pride. Finally, he let out a frustrated growl and threw open the door, hands raised in reluctant defeat. The sheriff entered the cabin, tipping his hat to Clara. Good to see you safe, ma'am. Clara smiled faintly. Thanks for showing up. I had things under control, but it's always nice to have backup. The sheriff chuckled, shaking his head. I should have known you'd handle it. They clearly had no idea who they were dealing with. As the sheriff escorted Brock out, Clara stood and stretched, her composure never faltering. She walked to the doorway, watching as the gang was loaded into wagons. With a satisfied smile, she turned back to the cabin, her voice low but resolute. Some lessons are learned the hard way. As the last wagon disappeared into the horizon, the sheriff stood beside Clara, his hat held respectfully in his hands. The prairie wind rustled softly, carrying away the tension that had hung over the cabin. You sure you're all right? The sheriff asked, his voice tinged with concern. Clara gave a small, knowing smile. I've been through worse, Sheriff. But thank you for coming when you did. The sheriff chuckled, slipping his hat back on. Don't thank me, ma'am. I just did what any lawman should. You're the one who kept your wits about you. Not many people could have outmaneuvered Brock and his gang like that. Clara turned to him, her eyes soft but steady. When you've lived the life I have, you learn how to handle men like them, but I left that life behind for a reason. The sheriff nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Well, it's good to know that even out here in the quiet, we've got someone like you looking out for the rest of us. As his horse trotted away, a familiar voice called from the distance. "Clara!" She turned to see Jacob riding toward her, his expression a mix of relief and worry. He dismounted quickly, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "When I heard what happened, Clara cut him off with a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Jacob. It's over now." Jacob's brow furrowed as he glanced at the cabin. "I can't believe they thought they could get away with this. Do they even know who you are?" "They didn't," Clara said, a touch of humor in her voice. "But I think they've figured it out by now." Jacob exhaled deeply, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I don't know how you stay so calm in situations like this. I'd have been a wreck." Clara rested her head against his chest, her voice soft. "Because I know what's worth fighting for, Jacob, and I know when to let the past do the talking." They stood in the fading light, the warmth of the setting sun casting a golden glow over the prairie. For a moment, everything was still, as if the land itself had sighed in relief. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of their ranch, Clara watched the stars appear one by one in the vast sky. Jacob handed her a cup of tea, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "You think you'll ever miss it? That part of your life?" he asked. Clara considered the question, her gaze distant. "Maybe sometimes," she admitted, "but what we've built here, it's worth leaving it all behind." Jacob reached for her hand, holding it gently. "I'm just glad you're safe, and I'm glad they learned not to mess with my wife." Clara laughed softly, squeezing his hand. "Let's hope they pass the message along." As the night deepened, Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The past was always there, a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had chosen a different life, one built on love, trust, and quiet strength. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all.